I never wanted to be the custodian of the 17th Imperial Wing. Nobody did, really. The posting was considered a soft exile, a punishment dressed up in clean corridors, and a modest salary paid in galactic credits that couldn't buy you back your dignity. The 17th Wing was where the Velthari Empire stored things it didn't know what to do with: old treaty documents, decommissioned navigation arrays. And as of 14 months ago, one widowed Empress and her 4-year-old daughter, sequestered from the main palace complex after a succession dispute that I had been told, very firmly, was none of my business. My name is Ethan Marsh, former Earth Defense Liaison, former Deep Space Survey pilot, former a lot of things that didn't work out. I was 37 years old. I had a bad shoulder from a crash landing on Kepler Station 3 years back, and I had precisely 0 qualifications for custodial work in an alien imperial palace. But the Human Auxiliary Services Bureau needed someone who spoke passable Velthari, had a clean security record, and was willing to take a posting that everyone else had declined. I was willing, mostly because I didn't have anywhere else to be. The 17th Wing was a structure of pale blue stone that the Velthari called asterisk Seravith, a mineral found only on their home moon, which apparently resonated with certain frequencies and made the occupants feel calmer. I felt no particular calmness. What I felt, walking those long corridors alone in the early morning hours with a cleaning apparatus and a maintenance log, was the specific quiet of a place where something had gone very wrong, and the world had simply moved on around it. The Empress did not speak to me for the first 3 months. That was not unusual, I was told. Velthari of high station did not address service staff directly. There were protocols, requests came through the household AI, a soft voice system called Vel that translated the Empress's needs into task assignments. The South Corridor ventilation system requires calibration. The nutrient garden on sublevel 2 needs replanting. The child's sleeping quarters require a new temperature regulator. The child. I heard her before I ever saw her. It was early. The wing's internal lights still dialed down to their nighttime amber, and I was in the corridor outside the nursery doing a routine check on a power conduit that had been flickering. Small hands, I was coming to understand, had a way of finding every button and panel in a room and pressing all of them in sequence, so half my maintenance calls were quietly child-related. I heard small feet on the floor, then a door opened. She was tiny, even by Velthari child standards. A small round face, large dark eyes that held that particular silver luminescence all Velthari were born with, and a crown of fine dark hair that floated slightly in the wing's atmospheric field. She was wearing a sleep garment 3 sizes too large for her, printed with small creatures that I recognized as asterisk Thuval, a Velthari fauna somewhere between a rabbit and a very bad-tempered cat. She looked at me. I looked at her. "You're the human," she said, not unkindly, mostly just factual. "I am," I said. I crouched down to her level the way I'd learned you were supposed to do. "My name is Ethan. What are you doing up so early?" "Vel said the lights were wrong," she said. "I wanted to see." "The conduit," I said. "I'm fixing it now. It'll be right in a minute." She considered this with great seriousness. "Does it hurt, the light?" "Conduits don't really feel things," I said, "but I'll be gentle anyway." She seemed satisfied with this. She sat down cross-legged on the floor, apparently planning to watch me work, and I let her. It seemed rude to send her back to bed. Her name was Sorai. I learned this from Vel later, because she didn't tell me herself that first morning. She just sat and watched with those silver eyes while I worked, occasionally asking questions about the tools I was using in the careful, precise way that very small children have when they are actually paying close attention and not just filling the silence. When I finished, she stood up, nodded once, a gesture so perfectly adult that it nearly broke my heart, and went back inside. It became a habit. Not every morning, but often enough that I started checking the South Corridor power panels at the same time, whether they needed it or not. She would appear in her oversized sleep garment, settle onto the floor, and watch. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she just kept me company in the way children do, present and comfortable and filling a space you hadn't known was empty. I learned things about her in pieces. She was 4 years old, which in Velthari developmental terms meant she was in the stage they called Velsari *, the age of deep observation, where children were said to absorb everything around them like the Seraphith stone absorbed frequencies. She liked the Thuval creatures on her sleep garment because they were, in her words, angry but also soft, which is interesting. She had opinions about the wing's nutrient garden that were more sophisticated than mine. She missed, though she never said so directly, something that I could feel in the way she sometimes went quiet mid-sentence and looked at a point in the middle distance. I didn't push, I just kept showing up. The Empress remained a presence I felt but never encountered, a light under a door, a half-finished cup of something left in the observation room, a schedule of meals and requirements that came through Vel with mechanical precision. I understood, without being told, that the Empress Velindra was managing a grief so large it had reorganized itself into routine, the way damaged things do. I understood that because I had done something similar after Kepler Station. The 4th month, Sorai asked me about my shoulder. She had noticed the way I favored it, the slight hesitation before I reached up to access a high panel, the automatic way I shifted my body. Velthari children, I was discovering, noticed everything. "Does it hurt all the time?" she asked. "Not all the time," I said, "just when I forget about it." "My mother's heart hurts all the time," Sorai said, with the particular directness of children who have not yet learned that some things are too heavy to say out loud. "She thinks I don't know, but I do." I set down my tool and looked at her. "I know," I said. "Do hearts get better?" she asked. "Like conduits?" I thought about that for a long time. "Differently," I said finally. "Conduits go back to what they were, hearts. They mostly just learn to carry it differently. So it's not lighter, but you get stronger." Sorai turned this over in her mind with great seriousness. "That doesn't sound very nice," she said. "No," I said, "it doesn't." She nodded, like we had agreed on something important, and went back to watching me work. The first time I saw Empress Velindra, I almost walked into her. I was rounding the corner from the East Utility Corridor at the end of a long shift, arms full of maintenance equipment, head down reviewing my log, and I came around the corner and stopped 2 inches from walking directly into the Empress of the Velthari Empire. She was taller than I expected, most Velthari were, but there was something about the way she stood that added to the impression. Dark hair pulled back with the specific precision of someone who controlled whatever they could control. Eyes that were silver luminescent like Sorai's but older, carrying something behind the brightness that had been there a long time. She was wearing a simple gray robe, nothing imperial, and she looked at me with an expression that was carefully, professionally blank. I stepped back, nearly dropped my equipment, managed not to. "Empress, I apologize, I didn't see." "You are the custodian," she said. Her voice was low and very even. "Ethan Marsh, yes, Human Auxiliary Services, I'm sorry to have." "My daughter told me about you," she said. I stopped. "She says you fix things at night so they don't make noise during the day," Velindra said. "She says you are gentle with the conduits." I didn't know what to do with that. "She's good company," I said because it was true. Something moved across the Empress's face, fast, there and gone. She looked at me for another moment, and I had the distinct impression of being assessed in a way that went deeper than the surface. "The East Observation Deck," she said. "The atmospheric seal needs recalibration. Vel submitted the request this morning." "I'll take care of it today," I said. She nodded once, Exactly the way Sorai did, I realized, and walked past me down the corridor. I stood there for a moment, holding my equipment, and then I went to fix the atmospheric seal. After that, she spoke to me sometimes. Always practically. Always with the specific tone of someone addressing maintenance staff. But she spoke, which Vel told me, not in words, but in the slight shift of its response patterns, was unusual. The Empress did not typically address custodial staff. I didn't make anything of it. I just answered practically, the way she spoke, and did the work. What I noticed was this. When I came to fix something in or near the rooms Velindra used, Sorai would often appear, as if summoned, though not by me, and Velindra would sometimes stay at a distance, engaged with something on her datapad in a way that was not quite the same as leaving. I was careful not to notice this too, obviously. I was even more careful not to examine why I looked forward to those hours in the South Wing, where the *** stone hummed at a frequency that got into your bones, and a small girl asked me questions about broken things while her mother stood just outside the radius of conversation and pretended to read. The crisis came in the 6th month. I learned about it the way I learned most things in the 17th Wing, obliquely, in pieces, assembled from fragments. The succession dispute, which I had been told was none of my business, had apparently sharpened into something with edges. There were factions within the Velthari High Council who felt that the Empress's extended seclusion had weakened the imperial position. There were counterfactions who felt the Empress should be further isolated. There was a political architecture of pressure and counterpressure that I didn't fully understand and wasn't supposed to. What I understood was that one morning Vel's task assignments arrived 2 hours late, and when they came they were terse and incomplete, and somewhere in the wing a door that was usually open was closed. Sorai didn't appear in the south corridor that morning. I did my work. I kept to my schedule. At the end of my shift I was doing a final systems check near the nursery wing when I heard, from behind the closed door, the specific quality of silence that is not silence, the silence of someone holding very still, containing something. I stood in the corridor. It was not my business. Maintenance staff did not knock on closed doors. I knocked on the closed door. There was a long pause. Then the door is closed. I know, I said. I just wanted to check the temperature regulator. Sorai mentioned it was running warm. Another long pause. The door opened. The Empress was standing in the middle of the nursery, and Sorai was asleep on the small bed in the corner, curled tight around her **Thuval* garment. Velindra's face was composed. Her eyes told a different story. The temperature regulator is fine, she said. I know, I said. I checked it yesterday. She looked at me for a long moment. There were things in her expression that she was managing very precisely, like someone walking across ice, testing each step. The council has made its intentions clear, she said finally. Not to me exactly, just into the room. They intend to remove Sorai from the 17th Wing, to place her in formal imperial education. A pause, away from here. I didn't say anything. I waited. She is 4 years old, Velindra said. The composure cracked just slightly on the last word, just slightly. She is 4 years old and they want, she stopped, rebuilt the composure. I have until the end of the month to respond to the formal petition. What are your options? I asked. To comply, she said, or to contest it, which would require me to demonstrate that Sorai's current environment is adequate for imperial development, which would require me to, she stopped again. Rejoin the court, I said. Yes. She said it the way people say the name of something they have been avoiding looking at for a very long time. I looked at Sorai, asleep and small and unaware, her hand wrapped around the ear of her Thuval * printed sleeve. I thought about a 4-year-old sitting, cross-legged on a corridor floor at 5 in the morning, asking me if broken things could feel pain. She's going to be okay, I said. Vailindra looked at me, not a court look, not an Empress look, just a look. You don't know that. No, I said, but she asks the right questions. That matters more than you'd think. A long silence. You should go, Vailindra said. Yes, I said. I didn't move immediately. For what it's worth, she's stronger than she looks. She gets that from somewhere. I went. The next 3 weeks had a particular texture. Vailindra was making her preparations. I could feel the change in the wing, a kind of gathering. Vel's task requests became more organized, more forward-looking. Small things in the Empress's chambers were being sorted and readied. The household AI confirmed, when I asked it indirectly, that the Empress had initiated communication with her official court liaison for the first time in 14 months. She was coming back, not because she wanted to, because Sorai needed her to. I found this. I didn't have a word for what I found it. I found it something. Sorai, meanwhile, had apparently decided that the appropriate response to pending major life change was to accelerate her curiosity about everything in range. She appeared in the corridor most mornings now, asking questions that were increasingly complicated, ranging from how starship navigation arrays calculated course corrections to whether it hurt the *Seraph* stone to be cut into bricks, and whether the bricks remembered what it was like to be a mountain. Probably not, I said about the last one, but I like that you wonder about it. My father used to wonder about things, she said. It was the first time she'd mentioned him. I kept my hands on my work and didn't make it a big moment. Yeah. Mother says he wondered too much, Sorai said. She tilted her head. I think that means she liked it. Probably, I said. Do you wonder about things? All the time, I said. She seemed satisfied with this. She went quiet for a while, which was not her usual mode. Then, are you going to leave when Mother goes back to court? I set down my tool and looked at her. Is that what you're worried about? She shrugged in the way children do when they are absolutely worried about something. I don't know yet, I said. That depends on a lot of things, but I'd tell you first, okay? She considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Then she nodded once in that adult way that still caught me every time. The last morning before the formal transition, the court liaison was arriving the following day. I was in the east corridor running a final systems diagnostic when I heard small feet. But they weren't alone. Sorai came around the corner, and behind her, moving quietly, was Vailindra. The Empress was dressed formally for the first time since I'd arrived, the gray robe replaced with the deep blue of imperial dress, her hair arranged with the precision of someone who had remembered how. She looked like herself. She also looked like someone who had found that being herself again was harder than she'd anticipated. Sorai ran the last few feet and dropped down cross-legged onto the floor beside me, settling in with the comfortable ease of long habit. I looked up at Vailindra, who had stopped a few feet away. She said she needed to check the conduit, Vailindra said. There was something dry and almost warm in her voice. The conduit is fine, I said. I know, she said. She came a little closer. She looked at her daughter on the floor, and then she looked at me, and I looked at her, and there was a moment of shared understanding that didn't need translation. Sorai was looking between us with her silver eyes. Ethan, she said. Yes. She looked at me very seriously. She looked at her mother. She looked back at me. You look just like Daddy, she said. The corridor went absolutely silent. I didn't know what to say. I looked at Sorai, who seemed to feel she had communicated something important and factual and was waiting for us to catch up. I looked at Vailindra. Vailindra had gone very still. The color in her face was a complicated thing. Velthari didn't pale the way humans did, but something shifted in the luminescence of her eyes, some dimming and then a sharpening. She was looking at Sorai, and then she was looking at me, and then she was looking at a point somewhere beyond both of us. She didn't answer. The silence stretched. I don't think I look like him, I said finally, gently, but I think maybe you mean something else. Sorai tilted her head. He used to fix things too, she said, and he always told me what was true even when it was hard, and he sat on the floor. She considered this. Daddy didn't like chairs. I heard Velindra exhale. It was a small sound, almost nothing, but it had a great deal in it. I remember that, Velindra said. Her voice was very quiet. He thought chairs were a system imposed by people who didn't trust comfort. You've never told me that, Sorai said, delighted. No, Velindra said. I haven't told you enough. She came fully forward then and sat, not against the wall, not at a distance, down beside her daughter on the corridor floor. Her imperial dress pooled around her on the **Seraph* stone, and she seemed not to notice or not to care. We sat like that for a while, the three of us, me with my maintenance log, Sorai asking questions about the diagnostic readout, which she had now apparently decided she needed to understand in depth. Velindra listening and sometimes answering, the way a person speaks when they are practicing at something they know they let go for too long. After a while Sorai, apparently satisfied with the state of the conduit, announced she needed breakfast and departed with her characteristic decisive energy. Velindra stayed. She didn't look at me immediately. She looked at her hands in her lap, and I could see her assembling something, not composure exactly, something more honest than composure. She is not wrong that you remind her of him, she said, not in appearance. In a pause. He was a person who could sit on a corridor floor and mean it, who answered hard questions without making them larger than they needed to be. She paused again. I have not met many people like that. I'm sorry, I said, for your loss. I don't think I've said that directly. No, she said, you haven't. She finally looked at me. That is also something he would have done, waited until the right moment instead of filling the space. I didn't know what to do with the weight of that. I held it carefully. What was his name? I asked. Sorai, she said. She is named for him. Sorai is what he called himself in his private letters. The luminescence in her eyes was doing something complicated. He died 14 months ago, a frontier defense engagement that should not have been necessary. He was very good at his work and it did not save him. She said this precisely, without affect, in the way of someone who has learned to carry a fact without letting it break them each time. I brought us here because the main palace was too full of him, I said. She looked at me, yes. And here there was just the shape of what was gone, I said, instead of the actual places where he'd been. A long silence. That is correct, she said. Though I did not know, that's what I was doing until just now. We sat on the floor of the corridor in the pale blue light of the **Seraph* stone, and outside somewhere the wing's atmospheric systems ran through their morning cycle. And I thought about a man named Sorai who sat on floors and answered hard questions, and died in a frontier engagement that should not have been necessary. And I thought about his daughter asking me if broken things could feel pain. And I thought about the way grief reorganizes itself into routine in the people who survive it. She's going to be all right, I said again, and so are you. You said that before, Velindra said. I told you that you couldn't know. I still can't, I said. I'm saying it anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Then why? Because it's true in the direction that matters, I said, which is forward. Another long silence. Something in her face was changing, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way things change when they've been still for a very long time and something finally gives them permission to move. The court liaison arrives tomorrow, she said. I know. I will be moving Sorai and myself back to the main palace complex within a week. I know. The 17th wing will require a new custodian, she said. I thought about that, about what it meant and what she might mean by saying it to me. I suppose it will, I said. She stood and straightened her imperial dress, and for a moment she was entirely the Empress again, precise and composed and carrying everything she carried with the efficiency of long practice. Then she looked down at me, still sitting on the floor, and something in her face was not composed at all. "The position of senior custodian to the imperial household," she said, "is not a punishment posting. It is a significant appointment." She paused. "It is currently vacant." I looked up at her. "I do not typically address custodial staff directly," she said. "I am told I have been making exceptions." Something moved in her expression that was, very carefully, almost something like the beginning of something. "Sorai trusts you. I find I agree with her judgment." She waited. "That's a large thing to offer a maintenance tech," I said. "Yes," she said, "it is." I thought about the specific quiet of the 17th wing at 5 in the morning, and a small girl on a corridor floor, and the weight of Kepler Station that I had been carrying for 3 years, and how it had gotten somehow lighter in these 6 months, without me noticing exactly when. "I'd need to understand the scope," I said. "That would be reasonable," she said. "And the atmospheric systems in the main palace complex, those haven't been properly calibrated since the last custodial rotation, based on the maintenance logs I've reviewed." Something crossed her face that was absolutely not a smile and also absolutely was. "I am aware," she said. "It is one of the reasons the position is open." "I'll take it," I said. She nodded once in that precise and Sorai-identical way and walked down the corridor. At the corner she paused. "Ethan Marsh," she said. "Empress." "The answer to my daughter's question," she said, without turning around, "is that you do not look like him, but I think you understand him, and perhaps that is a more important thing." She went around the corner. I sat on the floor of the 17th wing for another few minutes, in the hum of the *Seraph* stone, and I thought about what it meant to be told something like that, and what it meant to take it seriously, and what it meant to walk forward into something that was entirely new while carrying everything you'd carried before. Then I picked up my maintenance log and went to start the morning diagnostics. The transition took 8 days. I learned the main palace complex in the way I learned everything methodically, from the infrastructure out. The atmospheric systems were, as I'd suspected, a considerable undertaking, and I spent the first 4 days doing nothing but auditing every environmental array in a structure that had not been properly serviced in 2 years. It was absorbing work. It kept me from thinking too carefully about the other thing. Sorai found me within an hour of arrival. She appeared in the east wing where I was running a conduit diagnostic, settled onto the floor. The main palace complex had very different floors, polished rather than stone, but she adapted without comment, and informed me that the pressure settings in her new quarters were calibrated for an adult, and she'd like them adjusted. "I'll fix it today," I said. "Good," she said. "Also, the light in the north garden is wrong, and there's something making a noise in the wall of the morning room that Mother says is probably a ventilation routing issue, but I think might be a ****. "Probably not a ****, I said. "But you'll check," she said. "I'll check," I said. She nodded her adult nod and went to have breakfast. Vailindra returned to court functions on the 5th day. I did not observe this directly. I learned it the way I learned most things, from the change in the palace's rhythms, the additional staff movement, the slight recalibration of the household AI to manage more complex scheduling. But in the late afternoon, when the formal events had concluded, she came through the east wing where I was finishing the atmospheric array calibration. She looked tired. She also looked like someone who had done something difficult and found that it was survivable. "How did it go?" I asked. She raised an eyebrow. It was a mild rebuke. Maintenance staff did not typically ask the Empress about her court functions. "Poorly," she said, then adequately, then a pause. "There is a council member who attempted to use Sorai's period at the 17th wing as evidence of inadequate imperial development. I found I had quite a clear response to that. What was the response? That my daughter, Valindra said, with a precise and controlled intensity, asked her first question about atmospheric physics at age 4, has developed a comprehensive theory about the emotional lives of building materials, and sat still for 2 hours while a human maintenance technician explained conduit diagnostics to her and retained every detail. I suggested that this indicated more than adequate development and invited the council member to contest it in formal session. I looked at her. Did he? He did not, she said. Good, I said. She looked at me for a moment. The tired was still there, but there was something else too, something that had more space in it than before, as if being back in the court had, despite everything, reminded her that she was capable of moving in it. The calibration, she said. Will you be finished today? Tomorrow morning, I said. There is, she paused, looked at the atmospheric array and then at me, and then at the window beyond which the palace gardens were going gold in the late light. There is a garden in the northeast quadrant, Sorev's. I have not maintained it since. She stopped. The records say the irrigation system requires service. I'll add it to the morning schedule, I said. She nodded, started to go. Valindra, I said. She turned. I'd used her name, not her title. We both noticed. He'd be proud of her, I said. Whatever he was, whatever kind of person he was, she is that and more. A long silence. The light in the garden changed. Yes, she said quietly, he would. She went. I stood with the atmospheric calibration equipment in my hands, in the palace that hummed differently than the 17th wing, in the life that was becoming something I hadn't anticipated, and I thought about moving forward while carrying what you carry, and I thought that maybe that was always what it meant to be human, or Vilthari, or anything that persisted. Sorai turned 5 3 weeks after we arrived. The birthday celebration was, by imperial standards, modest. Valindra had not yet fully reconstructed her social calendar, and modest was what felt right. A small gathering in the northeast garden, which I had spent the better part of 2 days restoring to working order. The irrigation was fixed. The light deflectors were recalibrated. The section that had gone to seed in 14 months of neglect had been coaxed back into something that, if not perfect, was alive and growing again. I was not technically invited to the birthday celebration. I was technically in the garden making sure everything was running correctly. Sorai found me immediately, as she always did, and dragged me by the hand to where the small table was set, and informed me that I was required to stay because she had made a specific request. You can't make a specific request about maintenance staff, I said. I'm the princess, she said. This was, I discovered, not an easy argument to counter. Valindra, when Sorai presented me at the table with the specific energy of a child who has arranged something and is waiting for the adults to recognize it correctly, looked at me with an expression that was composed and also absolutely not composed. I believe you are required to stay, she said. Imperial birthday protocol. I didn't know that was a protocol, I said. It is now, Sorai said firmly, and sat down, and helped herself to the first of the layered confections that the palace kitchen had made in the shape of asterisk thuval creatures. I sat down. Valindra sat across from me. In the northeast garden, in the gold afternoon, with the irrigation system running quietly the way fixed things run, and Sorai narrating a very complicated story about an asterisk thuval who was also a princess, but was keeping this secret for reasons that were both practical and philosophical. I thought about how much ground you can cover in 6 months if you're paying attention to the right things. Valindra looked up from her daughter and met my eyes across the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Later, much later, in the way of things that begin as quietly as they begin, she would tell me that she had noticed me before I noticed her. That she had watched through the monitor feeds in the early months as her daughter appeared in the corridor and settled on the floor beside a human who simply let her be present without agenda, and that she had understood something from that, something about what her daughter needed and about what she herself had forgotten was possible. She told me this on an evening in the northeast garden, walking the restored paths while Sorai slept inside, and she said it in the factual tone she used for true things, and I listened the way I'd learned to listen in that wing where everything was about what went unsaid. When she told you that you looked like him, Vailindra said, I could not answer because you were afraid it was true, I said. And also afraid it wasn't. She looked at me. Both, she said. Yes. I'm not him, I said. I know, she said. That is not, she stopped, considered, began again in the way she did when she wanted to say something exactly right. You are not a replacement, you are not a continuation, you are a pause. A different thing that I did not expect and have not decided what to do with yet. That's honest, I said. I prefer honesty, she said, even when it is inconvenient. So do I said. We walked a little further along the path, in the evening air of the palace gardens, and the irrigation system ran at the correct pressure, and somewhere inside the palace Sorai was dreaming, probably, about Thuval asterisk creatures with classified social status. The position of senior custodian, Vailindra said eventually. Yes. It is a long-term appointment. I assumed, I said. I find that I am, she looked at the garden and then at me. I find that I am glad you took it. It wasn't much. It was also from her considerable. So am I said. We walked back toward the palace lights, not quite together and not quite apart, carrying what we each carried, moving in the direction that was forward. Which is, I had come to understand enough.